support to our government, support to the Kingdom of Tonga, and I'd like to just spend a couple of moments speaking about the week that has been. I won't spend too much time doing that, but as everyone else will be aware, the media reports of the volcanic eruption last Saturday caught everybody by surprise. There are seasons for cyclones. There are never a season for volcanoes erupting or tsunamis that result from them. We took time and energy on that Saturday evening to ensure that New Zealand Defence Force assets were prepared for the tsunami that ultimately arrived here, and then got into the business on Sunday of doing our best to understand the situation in Tonga and the wider Pacific region. As a result, everyone would have seen the satellite images of the explosion, and of course within our hearts, as with everyone else in New Zealand, we were very worried about the fate of the people of Tonga and further afield such a massive detonation. We're able to get permissions to get a P3 Orion away to the Tongan Island group to do the initial surveillance on Monday. That was successful, and those images were passed on via the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the Tongan government on Monday. During that time, we were doing our best to understand what the situation was on the ground and what might be needed. We unfortunately have been in the position of responding to disasters both here at home and in our neighbourhood in the Pacific, and have a fairly mature idea of what could be needed in these types of events. The first thing that you need to do is understand the situation. That's what the P3 flight was about, and the second one on Wednesday. We're also aware that there is going to be some disruption to the Nuku'alofa harbour and other areas, and this is going to be a key method of entry into the country when stores and relief supplies start arriving. So we were aware that getting a ship away with a hydrographic team and a diving team would be important, and we're also aware that water, food, hygiene, shelter, all of those basic needs were going to be threatened. It was very likely they're going to be threatened, and the best opportunity for us to start getting things going that way was with HMNZS Aotearoa. It's a very large ship and therefore needed to follow the smaller ship that was going to do the survey. We're very interested in getting the airport, an understanding of what the airport was like at Tongatapu at Nuku'alofa, and as you will all be aware, it was heavily covered in ash, and therefore that precluded safe aircraft operations until today. The airfield has been opened today. There was a mammoth effort by His Majesty's Armed Forces to clear that runway by hand, and they've achieved that this afternoon, and our first C-130 arrived shortly after 4 o'clock this afternoon with Ministry of Foreign Affairs provided relief stores, and that is now being unloaded as we speak. No contact, COVID protocols are being adhered to rigorously, and that aircraft will return to New Zealand tonight and stand by for further tasking, which could be as early as Saturday for his next flight. Coming up in the next 48 hours, HMNZS Wellington, she departed on Tuesday morning. I'm expecting her to arrive within the next 2 hours and commence survey of Nuku'alofa Harbour, and the preparation that she will be achieving will allow HMNZS Aotearoa to arrive tomorrow, and via a no contact process alongside the port, start discharging up to 250,000 litres of fresh water and other humanitarian and disaster stores. Towards the end of tomorrow, some people may be aware that we've had HMNZS Canterbury at sea the last 2 days. There hasn't been a specific request for her yet, but as with the first two floating capabilities that we send offshore, it is anticipated that the capabilities that she can bring will be required, and the cargo that she will be taking is being assembled at Devonport today, and she will come back from sea tomorrow, load that cargo and head on her way. This will be not an intention of getting in front of permissions or asks from the Kingdom of Tonga. Our thinking it is much better to get the capability 15 miles off the coast of Tonga and not be required and turn around than to be desperately required and still here in New Zealand. So that's what we know at this stage. It's going to be a busy couple of weeks at the Defence Force. I'll now be happy to take your questions if there are any.
What sort of supplies will be delivered to these flights?
The flights today were Ministry of Foreign Affairs provided standard humanitarian assistance and disaster relief stores. I anticipate there will be sanitation, water purification, shelter, hygiene kits, personal hygiene kits, food, those kind of things in this first. Well, I can imagine that there's going to be some challenges right from the beginning with regards to ongoing food security, and we do know that various areas in Tonga-Tapu, particularly towards the northwest, have been damaged and structures have been damaged. So shelter and those kind of things are going to be important. I haven't had a report from the crew, but we did get a look at Nuku'alofa Airport yesterday with the surveillance flight, and it was pleasing to see that the structure was still intact. There was no damage. The only real impediment was this ash, volcanic ash, that was across the airfield. We do know that the navigation aids are working, so it's safe to operate, and we'll get a report back from the Hercules crew shortly, I would expect, on just what the facilities are like on the ground.
Can you give a sense of what the COVID protocols will look like in practice for both the Hercules and then for the ships?
Yes, I can. I think the best way that I could describe it is it's going to be no contact. We are going to rigorously be disciplined in ensuring that COVID is not transmitted into Tonga via the Defence Force. And we have some experience in the Pacific since the COVID pandemic commenced in doing no contact logistic stops and delivery of stores. In fact, HMNZS Manauanui has been alongside in Nuku'alofa during the pandemic and delivered containers of stores with no contact. Okay, for the Hercules today, the example I would use is when we provided relief into Vanuatu after their cyclone. The Hercules crew will have no contact with anyone on the ground. The stores themselves are sanitised, and everyone is wearing PPE. Now the stores are removed from the aircraft, and the people will then move away. And the reception people at the airport at Nuku'alofa will then take those stores away. There will be no contact between the New Zealand Defence Force people or anyone on the ground. Oh yes, obviously it's going to be a longer process, and we would prefer to be able to get ashore and help. I think the term that we usually use is boots on the ground. It means that we can do a lot more, but we're very respectful that the last thing that Tonga would need now is a COVID outbreak on top of this disaster. We will have our concept of operations has been developed to allow us to be able to achieve the mission without having any contact at all. And yes, that is a challenge, but we have worked on it before. If we get the opportunity to operate on the ground, then we'll make sure that we're being very, very disciplined about our personal protection and the other protocols that are in place from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Some of the islands have been completely wiped out. What sort of things are
Well, what I'm expecting to see is pretty much the images I think you've seen in the media. I was as shocked as anyone when looking at the side-by-sides in international media with the two images, where I became sure that the right-hand image was black and white and it wasn't. And if that's an illustration of the kind of impact that the ash has had across the islands, particularly across Tonga-Tapu and the Namuku group, and of course then there has been damage observed in the Ha'apai island group, and the understanding of what the impacts of that damage is now is not sufficient for us to be able to make any comment about what might be required next. It's worrying images, and we're hoping that we'll be able to clarify that, particularly for whānau friends and cousins and of all of those people in Tonga, back here in New Zealand and around the world.
Is there anything new from the second surveillance flight, and in particular some of those worst-hit islands like Mango, news emerged quite slowly that they had been so badly hit, despite those pics had been taken by the New Zealand government and given to Tonga? Will they be released to the public this time?
The images that were taken on the second flight yesterday, there was a couple of objectives for that surveillance flight. Perhaps not understood as there was an objective for us to have a look at the eastern border of the Lao group in Fiji after Cyclone Cody. So we did that on the way, and happily there was no damage observed through any of that surveillance. Across the Tongan group, we were very keen to be able to close off some of the gaps that we had from the first surveillance flight, and also in response to some specific requests for information from the Tongan government, and also revisit a couple of areas just to get better imagery, plus do a survey particularly of airfields and port infrastructure in the Northern Island groups to facilitate our expectations of how we might be operating in the coming days.
Is there anywhere that makes you very concerned in that same way, islands really decimated, for example, any new
I will say, as regards to the images and the outcomes from those images, whilst we took the images using our aircraft, it is my position that they are sovereign property of the Kingdom of Tonga. So I will resist making any comments in relation to those. I'm mindful that anything I say could be interpreted one way or the other, and there are people and families in whānau that are going to be affected from that. So I'll leave that for others to make comments about the outcomes of that surveillance. At this stage, there's no intention to send further ships, so we'll have Wellington and Aotearoa in country by tomorrow. Canterbury will leave on, I'm hoping tomorrow night, worst case will be Saturday morning, so she should arrive about Tuesday if she is required. I think there's a good argument that she is. She also has a big water supply, and she'll be taking 2 NH-90 helicopters and a humanitarian assistance and disaster relief task unit. There'll be engineers, 3 types of desalination plants that will be able to turn salt water into fresh. All of these things we think will be useful, including some heavy plant, bulldozers and so forth to assist with clearance. I should emphasise though that to get anything ashore will require permissions to do that, and at this stage there is no intention to land any of that equipment because that's a sovereign decision for the Kingdom of Tonga. I'll say that my understanding of the situation has probably come from the same source of yours. Information has been a real challenge at the moment. So yes, the latest figure I heard is that there were 3 confirmed deaths. From the size of that explosion that could be seen from orbit, and the tsunami that was felt and experienced all the way across the Pacific, sadly I'd be very surprised if there are not more injuries, but we just have to get there to find out, and that'll be one of the challenges that are coming in the coming days.
The role of communication seems to have been a really standout and different from other events of this kind. Can you sort of explain how it's affected planning and whether it's made things considerably slower or different?
Yes, I think it goes it should go without saying that the first thing that we're really interested in is to understand the situation before we start acting, and the fact that the communications cable has been severed, then that really reduced the amount of data that can be passed via satellite and the systems that are in place. Our access to intelligence in country, or our understanding in country, has been confined, as many others have been, just to voice calls. Getting images in and out have been very difficult, and I am being made aware that commercial entities are working to improve the situation on the ground. And one of the key things that we'll be looking to establish in the coming hours is a satellite communication for our people. There's one person on the ground, our defence attaché, who's working in the High Commission in Nuku'alofa, and if that can then open a channel that more data and therefore better information flow can be achieved, then we'll be looking forward to doing that. I don't have an idea of that. I do know that there's a couple of planning dynamics that we've been working to. One of them is that we don't wish to be a burden on Tonga's food supply, water supply, or fuel supply. These are the kind of things we don't want to go in and then start consuming. So I'd expect that the task group would be able to support itself without any external assistance for the best part of about 30 days. If we're there that long, then we'll have to look at resupplying somehow, and that's a challenge for planners in the coming days if we're required to.
What time will those flights arrive?
The C-130, I'm expecting will be back into the country probably by about 10 p.m. or 10:30 p.m. Roughly this evening.
Will troops go onto the ground in these sort of large numbers, or does troops only stay on a ship?
We will be staying completely contactless. Now, what that means is if we're moving containers off the ship, then besides sanitising everything, sterilising everything, we would expect that the containers, for example, get hooked on at the ship end, the crane will swing it out, and then Tongans on the jetty will disconnect the containers and take them away. Likewise with the delivery of water or any other stores, we'll make it contactless, and I think we've got a fairly effective way of doing that. We've had good liaison on the ground, good coordination with other partner nations. We continue to do that. We're looking forward, I'm very much looking forward to seeing water and food and other stores getting ashore in the coming day, and then more next week. And if, as it unfolds over the weekend, a decent utility of the units that we've got up there in other areas as they may be required. And I'm thinking specifically that HMNZS Wellington and the hydrographic detachment will be very useful in being able to go and survey some of those northern islands to check debris in the channels to start opening up the ability to move things by sea into those islands. Well, they're going to have to get on with it, because Aotearoa is arriving tomorrow and she's 24,000 tonnes, and we do know that there are smaller vessels have gone in and out of Nuku'alofa Harbour, and that's an appropriate thing to do. The chances are, having seen those movements, that it's going to be safe for Aotearoa and other larger vessels to get in, but we take an approach of being sure before we do that, and we'll be able to not only provide safety reassurance for our own units going in, but also open up for other commercial entities that will be bringing onward stores. Well, we'll be reactive from here. This is the first flight that's gone in. I believe there will be more things required, and I would expect that over the coming week we'll see 1, 2 or even 3 flights out of New Zealand into Nuku'alofa. I was commanding officer of Canterbury during the 2009 tsunami in Samoa and Tonga, and I witnessed firsthand the destruction of Nui Taputapu, and whilst I've seen that on the ground, the images from the P3 look similar to that event.